Hello, good evening and welcome everybody. My name is María José Yglesias. I am the Dean of the Faculty of Law, International Relations and Social Sciences of ULACIT. And we are very excited and grateful to have you all in this wonderful seminar about the art and science of serendipity and about Dr. Busch's recently published book on the subject. It is an honor to have Dr. Busch with us today, and we hope to have further opportunities to work with him in our faculty, as well as other university projects that definitely share Dr. Busch's views and passion for synchronicity and innovation. I'd like to offer a very special welcome to the university authorities, professors, and students, to the speakers of the webinar, as well as to all participants. It is our pleasure to be hosting this talk, which I am sure will provide us with amazing tools to face the unprecedented times that we are living. Our webinar will be moderated by Herman Duarte. He's a lawyer, sociologist, and author who has studied international commercial arbitration at Stockholm University and human rights and politics at the London School of Economics as a Chevening Scholar. Herman is the director of legal Simple Consulting, founder of Fundación Igualitos, officer of the Human Rights Law Committee of the International Bar Association, and representative of Arbitrator Intelligence. But before handing the webinar over to Herman, we have a very special guest for our opening remarks. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Alex Fernández, the CEO of ULACIT, and a Master of Innovation and Serendipity himself. Mr. Fernández, a fellow lawyer, has an MBA in Marketing and Executive Management, doctoral studies in Economics, Innovation Management, and Technology Policy, and throughout his career has accumulated more than 24 years of experience in management positions in recognized companies of a great number of industries, but with a special emphasis in the technology and education sectors. And he has been responsible for the delivery of more than 200 business transformation projects around the world. Mr. Fernández, welcome.
Muy buenas tardes a todos y las disculpas si hago mi presentación en español. De verdad es un honor para la universidad darle la bienvenida al Dr.Busch, un experto reconocido internacionalmente en áreas de innovación, liderazgo, sobre todo liderazgo impulsado por un propósito, liderazgo con impacto social y emprendimiento. Y realmente va a ser una charla interesantísima, ¿verdad? Arrancando por la pregunta de por qué tenemos un uso sin precedentes de las palabras sin precedentes, ¿verdad? Estamos hablando de una relación, de una forma de entender el mundo, de cosas extraordinarias que le pasan a gente ordinaria, que creemos que son momentos que no han sido planeados, pero en realidad han sido causados por nuestras acciones previas, la proactividad, la tenacidad para que nos sucedan cosas extraordinarias aún viviendo vidas ordinarias. Es una oportunidad muy interesante de conocer a un autor reconocido internacionalmente y que además ha estado transmitiendo este mensaje en entornos muy distintos de los entornos académicos. Ha sido invitado por asociaciones, ha sido invitado por grupos y hoy para nosotros en ULACIT es un placer recibir a semejante autor que tiene además una visión del mundo, diría, muy distinta a otros factores que nos enseñan a un ser mecanicista, a un ser en el cual nos vamos guiando por acciones y causas, por reacciones y por pasos siempre de alguna forma encajonados, siempre encadenados. Y esto nos va a permitir hoy entender el mundo de otra forma. Cómo esperar lo desconocido de una forma distinta, cómo esperarlo con los brazos abiertos, pero también sabiendo cómo vamos nosotros a poder romper algunos de los esquemas, cómo vamos a romper algunos de los biases que tenemos todos y cómo vamos a tener formas para cultivar esta serendipity. Y de verdad es un honor para nosotros darle la bienvenida al autor y agradecerle a todos los que han hecho posible una charla de tanto nivel para la universidad.
Muchísimas gracias a don Alex. And now before introducing and handing over the webinar, I want to introduce again Herman Duarte, also a very close friend for ULACIT and for the faculty. He will be introducing and hosting the conversation about serendipity and innovation with Dr. Busch. Herman.
There we go. Thank you very much, María José, for the introduction, and hello to each and every one of you that are connected here, especially to Mr. Alex, the new CEO of ULACIT, to Christian, that gave us the honor to join us today, and to the 168 participants that are connected here from, hopefully from Costa Rica, from Ecuador, like my friend Melika from Chivining as well. So, what is this serendipity thing? What are we talking about when we say these words, serendipity, synchronicity, and all these very strange situations that are acausal, not connected, yet somehow related? How does this happen? These will be some things that we will be speaking with Christian moving forward, but just to give you an example. So I saw this talk of Dr. Busch at a webinar like this, hosted by the London School of Economics, and I was fascinated by his talk, especially because he brings up this concept of serendipity, which I thought it was only like in Disney World movies or stuff like this. But then I realized how interesting it is that how this topic is also being discussed by innovators like himself that are in very important places like NYU, like the LSE, and how he brought this up in a book with some practical tips of how to make this happen. And it's pretty much, if I can summarize it in a way, as connecting the dots of taking the chances, taking the opportunities that they come up to you. And this is how this conference started, because I saw this talk, I was like, okay, let's see how can I connect with Dr. Busch you know, like Arianna Huffington writes the reviews of his book, so he's quite up there, you know, like very, very high up there, like very well connected. So how can someone like me reach out this important character? So first step, LinkedIn. So I reach out on LinkedIn, not possible still to reach out. But then I come up with the serendipity situation that he is part of a group of a college in London, that I lived there and he lived as well at some point in his life. And he posted about his conference. And that's how I messaged him and said, look, why don't we do this talk in Costa Rica? I know this university that is the most innovative university in Central America, perhaps one of the most innovative in Latin America. And we can make this happen. I immediately reached out to María José. María José was fascinated about the topic, and here we are. So thank you, Dr. Busch, for bringing up your very interesting concepts and knowledge here in Costa Rica, your first talk in Latin America of the book. So it's a great honor to be part of it. Dr. Busch.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Duarte, Mr. CEO Fernández, Professor Yglesias Ramos. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm very much looking forward to this session and also our collaboration in the future. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you tonight. I hope to see you in person sometime soon. Unfortunately, you know, the current situation didn't allow us to be live with you, but I do hope that we will do that live as well very soon. I have the pleasure to talk with you about something that has been very close to my heart, as Mr. Duarte, Mr. Fernández, and Professor Yglesias Ramos mentioned. It's been very close to my heart for a very long time, both as entrepreneur, social entrepreneur, business person, but also then as academic. So to give you a bit of context, you know, I used to be this kind of teenager who was very rebellious. I was thrown out of school. I had to repeat year in high school, so I didn't find real good ways to channel my energy. And, you know, I transferred this lifestyle into my driving style. And so, you know, I was kind of probably holding the unofficial world record of how many dustbins you can kick off on your way to school when you're in the car, knock them off. And, you know, one day I wasn't so lucky anymore. And I crashed into 4 parked cars, all cars completely smashed, including mine. And I will not forget the policeman who came to the scene and who said, oh my God, he's still alive. So this idea that I was supposed to be dead. And, you know, I asked myself all these weird questions the day afterwards. Like, you know, if I would have been killed, who would have come to my funeral? Who would have actually cared? Was it all worth it? Did I do anything meaningful? And, you know, at that point, I only had depressing answers. Like, no, I didn't do anything meaningful. There wasn't really anything. And so, you know, I started kind of getting on this intense search for meaning, trying to figure out what could life be about. And I started reading this wonderful book that I highly recommend, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And so the book is all about essentially how can we find meaning in the toughest of circumstances? How can we find meaning in the worst of situations? And so I started reading the book and I started to kind of try to figure out what is meaningful to me. And I realized that what I really enjoy doing is connecting people, connecting ideas, and somehow initiating positive change. And so, you know, I started out as community builder. We set up a community called Sandbox Network, which brings together young people around the world and helps them make their ideas happen. Then kind of as entrepreneur, social entrepreneur. And then later on, I went into academia as well. And one of the things that I found fascinating is that the most purpose-driven, successful, joyful people seem to have something in common. They cultivate serendipity. They see something in the unexpected and turn it into positive outcomes. And so this is really this session today is all about. How do we turn uncertainty? How do we turn unpredictability? And how do we essentially turn that into positive outcomes? Because that is in the end what really shapes our lives, right? If you look back on your lives, you know, I'm sure you mapped a lot of things out, you planned a lot of things, and then the unexpected happens and something completely different plays out, especially in times of COVID and so on. Now, being the German I am, of course, I have a very structured table of content. So I'd love to start with this bit of context, then going into the art and science of serendipity. What are we talking about? What is the science-based framework for it? And then really, what are some practices so that we can all create our own smart luck and really make those opportunities happen for ourselves. Now, the journey for the book itself, which you can see here, the Serendipity Mindset, was very serendipitous in itself. it's been a very long journey of doing a lot of research around it, then talking with a lot of people, trying to understand stories from people around the world. A lot of my work has been in low-income contexts, so a lot in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, in parts of Latin America, parts of Asia, and then also in a lot of Western settings. And so I also then had the book was a nice excuse to also dive a lot into research across different areas, everything from physics, quantum physics, chemistry to management and other parts and other literatures. And the beautiful thing is that in a way, everything said the same thing, that there is a way how we can cultivate serendipity and that there is a way that we can actually build a muscle for the unexpected. And so the book itself is all about saying, how do we bring together the science with inspiring stories as well as exercises and that allow us to really do something with it. Now, to make sure that we all kind of see it, from a kind of same perspective, I want to talk about a couple of examples just to say what serendipity is really about. On the left here, you see a brewery. So you see, due to COVID, a lot of breweries who sold usually alcohol to restaurants realized that they can't do that anymore because the restaurants went bankrupt. So they realized, oh my God, this is unexpected, but we can use our alcohol to produce hand sanitizer. So a lot of them became hand sanitizer companies and switched towards that kind of new capability. Another example here is on the upper right. Can anyone guess what that could be? Any guesses? What the thing on the upper right? What could that be? I mean, we can switch on the chat if you want, so that people can comment. But on the upper right, can anyone guess what it could be? Any? So that is actually, a couple of decades ago, a couple of researchers were people giving medication for angina, the disease, and they realized that there was some kind of movement happening in male participants' trousers. And what would we usually do? We would probably say, "Oh my God, that's embarrassing," right? That there is that movement happening. So we would probably say we would either try to ignore it, or we would essentially say, "Oh my God, let's try to find a better way to essentially cure that side effect." They said the opposite. They said, "You know what? That's unexpected, but there's a lot of people, a lot of men in the world who might have a problem in that department. So why don't we focus on this and make it into a medication itself?" And that is how Viagra evolved. So on the upper right, you see Viagra is one of the most effective medications for problems in that kind of department. Now, on the bottom right, you see something called the Project Funeral or the Postmortem, where the idea is that, a lot of times in organizations or a lot of times in, companies or families or others, whenever something goes wrong, we try to hide it away, right? We try to say, "Oh, let's not talk about it because we don't want to be a failure. We don't want to be kind of seen as a loser," right? Now, what some companies do is they say the opposite. You know what? 50% of innovations and inventions come serendipitously. They come unexpectedly. So we could as well open our minds to it. And so in one company, what they had is this, a window glass that wouldn't reflect the light. So it's a wonderful window and a wonderful technology. And when the light comes in, it doesn't reflect. And so, it's a wonderful technology, but they didn't realize that there wouldn't be a lot of people paying a lot of money for it. So they said, okay, let's put this to rest in front of people from, other divisions, and let's say, this is what we learned from it. And so what happened then, someone in the audience goes, hey, have you considered what this would mean for solar? If you take this technology and take it into a solar device, imagine how much energy that can absorb. And that is how, quote unquote, coincidentally, part of their solar division emerged. Again, it was something that was very unexpected, but this company facilitated a practice that made it more probable that that could happen. There's a couple of other examples here. We can talk about it later if we have more time. I want to use one more example, which is one of my favorites, which is the potato washing machine. So a couple of years ago, a company that I've been working with in China, they produce refrigerators and washing machines, and they received calls from farmers. And the farmers said, you know what, your washing machine is really bad. So they asked, why is the washing machine bad? Well, it always breaks down when I try to wash my potatoes. And so what would we usually say? We would probably say, well, don't wash your potatoes. It's a clothes washing machine. Don't wash your potatoes in that washing machine. They did the opposite. They said, you know what? That's unexpected, but there's probably a lot of farmers in China. So why don't we take built in a dirt filter and make it a potato washing machine? And that's how unexpectedly a potato washing machine emerged. Now that's just a couple of examples. You know, I'm sure you can think in your own life where, for example, you know, you might have met the love of your life, or your co-founder, or, you know, anyone who kind of changed your life. It might have been very unexpected in some kind of moment. You know, in my case, for example, like I tend to have very erratic hand movements. And so I tend to spill a lot of coffee. And, you know, when I'm in a coffee shop, like, and you spill a coffee, imagine the situation, right? You spill a coffee over a person in a coffee shop, and you spill that coffee. And, you know, now you have two options, right? If you sense there might be some kind of connection, there might be something there, you either just say, oh, I'm so sorry, here's a napkin. And then you walk outside and you think, what could have happened had I acted on this? Or the other option is you say, I'm so sorry, I was just thinking about this and this idea. And then you start a conversation and see where it could lead. The point here is that the way we react to the unexpected, the way we act on this and connect dots, defines what kind of positive outcomes can happen. And that's really what serendipity is all about. This kind of unexpected good luck that results from unplanned moments in which we have proactive decisions. It's our choice to make them happen. So it's very different from this kind of, you know, blind luck, very different from being born into a loving family or inheriting something, things we can't really influence. This is about smart luck, about creating our own active smart luck by seeing something in the unexpected and then connecting the dots and doing something with it. And so that's what, you know, from all the different ideas that we looked at, from all the different different unexpected positive outcomes, it's always the same process. There's some kind of trigger, right? So there might be some kind of movement happen in male participants' trousers. There might be a coffee that is being spilled. There might be calls from farmers. There might be all these different types of things. But then we have to do something with it. We have to make the accident meaningful. We have to react to that in some way. And that is our choice. That is our decision. And then we need to have the persistence, the tenacity to actually do something with it. And so only if we do that, then serendipity can happen. And so the beautiful thing about this is that we can either make accidents more meaningful. So whenever something doesn't work, we can still do something with it. Or, as we talk about later also, we can create more meaningful accidents. We can create more coincidences, as paradoxical as it sounds, that actually lead us to serendipity. And we'll talk more about this in a second. But really, just to make this case, of course, what can happen a lot of times is that we miss serendipity. So a lot of times we might not see the trigger, or we might not be able to connect the dots to some kind of relevant problem. And in fact, most of us miss serendipity all the time. And you know, some people then seem a little bit luckier than others, even they had the same situation that they started from. And so to give you an example of how much it is really about how we frame the world, a UK researcher did an experiment where he took someone who self-identifies as very lucky. So someone who says, good things always happen to me, I tend to have good things happen in my life, and someone who self-identifies as very unlucky. So someone who says, bad things always happen to me, I'm always in I'm always in accidents and so on. And so he tells them, okay, walk down the street. So the researcher tells them, walk down the street, go into the coffee shop, order coffee and sit down. And then we'll have an interview. What he doesn't tell them is that there's hidden cameras across the street. There's a £5 note, so money in front of the door. And inside the coffee shop, the table or the seat that's next to the counter is next to this extremely successful businessman who can make a lot of ideas happen and a lot of dreams happen. Now, the lucky person walks down the street, sees the £5 note, picks it up, goes inside the coffee shop, orders the coffee, sits next to the businessman, has a nice conversation, they exchange business cards, potentially an opportunity coming out of it, we don't know that. The unlucky person walks down the street, steps over the £5 note so doesn't see it, goes inside, orders a coffee, sits next to the businessman, the other person's left, the other person has left, and ignores the businessman, and that's that. At the end of the day, they ask both people, so how was your day today? And so the lucky person says, it was amazing, I found money in the street, I made new friends, and you know, potentially an opportunity coming out of it, we don't know that part. The unlucky person just says, well, nothing really happened. And you know, you probably all know these kind of people who seem to have a little bit more luck than others. A lot of times that's about the way they frame the world, but also we'll talk about a lot of the factors that they can influence that makes them have more of that kind of luck happen at all. And so one thing, we'll talk about this later, this is not only, you know, extroversion, for example, sometimes plays a role, right? So if we actually talk with people and these kind of things, it does play sometimes a role, but there's also a big role for introverts. There's a big role for people who wouldn't have talked with the businessman, but people who actually just see the £5 note, you know, who read something in a book and then connect dots and so on. So there's a huge role for introverts as well. Now, how do we know that it's serendipity? A lot of times it's about looking at the counterfactual. So what could have happened, right? So in the situation that I mentioned earlier in the coffee shop, and let's say you ended up having a conversation and you ended up, you know, in a wonderful situation with this person and you end up as love partners or as co-founders, you can think about what could have happened had I not acted on this. And so I'm a big fan actually of making a serendipity journal where you write down your incidences of something unexpected happening and how you reacted to it and understanding your pattern. Are you acting on these unexpected things, or is there something that holds you back? Is it that you don't feel worthy? You don't feel ready? All these different factors, because a lot of times we might see something in the unexpected, but we might not act on it. Now, we can also look at counterfactuals, you know, looking at situations where two people had the same situation, but reacted very differently. So for example, two researchers injected at the same time approximately, you know, injected rabbits with enzyme, with papain, which is an enzyme. And so they injected these rabbits and their ears flopped. And, you know, both were surprised. It was unexpected. But only one of them followed up on it and connected dots and said, oh, wow, that is probably about bloodstream and so and so. So we can probably do something, use it for arthritis, you know, the kind of disease that is based on blood flow being lower. And so essentially that is how a whole research stream around arthritis and so on emerged that later on led to a lot of big prices, versus in the other situation, nothing really happened. And so it's really about how one of them connected the dots and the other didn't. Now, one thing that I found really interesting when, you know, writing the book was realizing how many biases I have myself. And, you know, if serendipity is all about the question of positive outcomes and success, like how do we turn things into positive outcomes, the question is, what is actually a positive outcome, right? And I still remember when I went to the publisher with the first draft of the book, I presented it, you know, I was very excited. And they said, look, we love it, but we need more love stories. And I said, well, I'm not sure if I'm the right person to talk about love. I mean, I was then, you know, 35 years old back then. I was single, you know, I was like, I'm not sure I'm the right person to talk about love. But they were like, no, but like, find us more love stories. So I was like, okay, great. So right after that meeting, I had a meeting set up with an ex-girlfriend of mine, who's a close friend of mine. And so I asked her, so do you know of any great love stories? Like, I need more love stories. And she said, well, our story. And I was like, what do you mean our story? We're not together anymore. Where's the success here? Where's the positive outcome here? And, you know, she said, look, like I came, like back then, like I just came to London. We met serendipitously in a coffee shop and, you know, a relationship emerged out of it and came out of it. But in a way, we gave each other so much emotional support. We introduced each other to the right people who put us on our tracks to where we are today. And so essentially, even if it felt like bad luck in the moment that we broke up, it both put us on wonderful trajectories of actually having a nice life after. And so it really kind of made me question a lot of things of when do we look at things such as good luck and bad luck, and that a lot of times it might be, you know, the time at when we look at it might be much later. And so a lot of times actually bad luck can turn into good luck over time as well. Now, one thing before I go into the practices for how we can actually cultivate serendipity, how we can actually nurture serendipity, is to really say that there is, of course, a lot of structural constraints. So a lot of, you know, there's societal inequality, there's racial inequality, there's a lot of inequalities that make the starting position for some people much higher than for others. So I'm here in New York in the West Village. So, you know, I have access to networks, I have access to education. So it's easier for me to have a higher base level of potential serendipity versus a lot of my work is in, you know, the Cape Flats in Cape Town, where the base level of serendipity is much lower. And so in parallel to working on the mindset, of course, we also have to work on those kind of structural questions, making sure that all people have a similar base level of serendipity happen. Now, what are some of these practices that we can all use? One of my favorites is very simple ones that we can use in the day-to-day. So, for example, the way we ask questions, do we just ask something like, how do you do? You know, the como estás, like, how do you do? How are you doing? And so on, so versus like what's on your mind, or what inspired you about something, or something that opens up the opportunity space a little bit more. And conversely, the way we answer those questions has a big impact. So there's this wonderful entrepreneur in London, Ollie Barrett, and if you would ask him the question, what do you do? He would say something like, I'm a technology entrepreneur, but I'm also very excited about playing the piano, but what I really enjoy is the philosophy of science. Now, what he's doing here is he's giving you 3 potential hooks where you could be like, oh my God, such a coincidence. I recently started a philosophy of science seminar, we should connect. Or such a coincidence, I recently started hosting piano matinees, we should connect. The point here is that we can use every conversation to see the couple of dots where the other person can connect the dots based on their own interests. And so what we can do is in our Serendipity journal or in general, we can think about what are the kind of themes or interests that we find interesting, the kind of hooks that we can cast so that the other person can connect the dots for us. Now, there's a wonderful person who does that a lot, Cara Thomas. Those of you interested, she has a great kind of venture called Serendipity, which is all about the idea of essentially how do we get into the modus of asking questions differently, and one different question per day or something like that, which then already creates a lot of magic in your life. Now, a second one is really around looking at mistakes and crises differently. I mentioned the example of the project funeral, the post-mortem. There's a lot of other examples around how we can essentially, once we look at mistakes differently, once we look at mistakes as a learning opportunity, as experimentation, rather than just as failure, we start sharing more openly and learn from each other. And of course, a lot of times in a lot of cultures, we disincentivize sharing things that don't work, right? And so it's important, especially, you as future leaders, essentially when you have a team, the leader a lot of times has to be the first one who maybe says something like at Pixar, which is one of the most creative companies in the world, where the leader at the beginning says something like, at the beginning, all of our ideas are bad, or at the beginning, all of our movies are bad. The point here is that then people feel they can speak up more, they can raise their ideas, and even if an idea sounds a bit more crazy, they're not seen as a failure, but actually as someone who can really contribute, as Daniela would do. A third one is really around reframing situations. I'm a big fan of an organization in the Cape Flats in Cape Town called Reconstructed Living Labs. And so it's people who come out of a very tough context. It's former drug dealers, former drug users, and so on. And they developed a low-income, low-cost methodology, low-cost education methodology where, for example, 10 steps to use social media to build a business, or 10 steps to build your IT business. And then they take that methodology and go into local communities and work with people to turn them into teachers locally. So for example, they go into a new community and they ask what is already here and how can we make the best out of it? So if they see an old garage, they say, fantastic, that could be a potential training center. If they see a former drug dealer, they say, fantastic, that person will have wonderful social capital, they will be very resourceful and creative, and if we can turn them into a teacher, we can turn the community around. The point here is that what they're doing is they're reframing away from resource constraints, so just looking at what's lacking, right? Oh, we don't have enough budget, we don't have enough XYZ, to what is already here and how can we make the best out of it. And so, for example, their budgeting approach, if you would imagine you're organizing an event for 50 people, and usually what we do is we then say, okay, I need to buy 50 chairs. Now you put the budget item into ULACIT's kind of budget and you want the 50 chairs. If you're with our labs, with Reconstructed Living Labs, they will first ask you questions. They will say, do you really need the 50 chairs? If you really need the 50 chairs, do you really need the 50 chairs, or can you sit on the floor? Can you use the bench? If you really use the chairs, is there a restaurant next door that could borrow you the chairs because they might be closed at that time? Or is there any other way to get the chairs around here? And only if you say no to all these questions, then you can actually get the budget for the chairs. The point is that people are incentivized to make the best out of what is at hand, the best that's already there. And so the point here is that then you become really creative and you connect the dots differently, because you first want to understand, how can I make something out of whatever we have here, rather than directly asking for a budget. Then a fourth strategy is really a lot about enabling serendipity bombs. And so Mattan Griffel, this gentleman here, he does that a lot. So the idea here really is to, whenever we have the chance, to set a couple of bombs or mines, that could blow off at some point later in the future. So for example, let's say you graduate in 3 years and, you're not currently looking for a job, but you know that in 2 years you will look for a job. Then you can already now set a couple of serendipity bombs where on LinkedIn, for example, you can reach out to every second degree contact. If you have LinkedIn Premium, you can reach out to every second degree contact. So let's say you look for the people who inspire you the most in different areas, and you can send them an inspirational message saying, thank you for inspiring me. You're wonderful. I wanted to keep in touch with you, XYZ. And if you do that with 20 people, usually 2 or 3 say, oh my God, that's wonderful, XYZ. A lot of times it might be something they work on that you're interested in. The point is, it's a numbers game of connecting with a lot of people who you find inspiring. And then when you really need the job in a few years, then actually coincidentally, that person might work exactly on the kind of thing that you need at that point. So it's really about kind of laying the foundation already now, putting a lot of different seeds out there that could then at some point come to fruition. Now, another point is around leveraging how we can use technology and space design. So, companies like Google, for example, and others have used things such as random coffee trials, where essentially the idea is that, usually in real life, before COVID, you would bump into people, right? So within a company, for example, especially if you're a younger person, one of the great things is that you can run into more senior people who might tell you unexpectedly about a new idea or something. And so because of COVID, now people might stay home a little bit more. So what a lot of companies are doing is they are randomly matching people. They ask people, okay, are you free? When are you free? And then they randomly match them with other people in the company to have a coffee. And they give them an inspiring question, say, okay, have a conversation for half an hour. Let's see where it leads. The point here is that we can recreate those serendipitous moments online as well in a lot of different ways that can actually accelerate serendipity a lot. So people like Uzoma and others have been very involved in creating that kind of serendipity. Now, last but not least, and then we'll dive into the question session, and I'm really looking forward to also hearing your thoughts and ideas and maybe ways of how you have seen that play out in your own life. Something that we've seen in our research is that what is really important in order to connect dots is to develop some kind of sense of direction. So some kind of idea of, in some companies, it might be a sense of purpose or a sense of where people are going, or it might be a curiosity or an interest, but just something that allows us to, whenever we are in a moment or a situation, we can say, oh, wow, that relates to this, this relates to this. And so that is really kind of leading back to this idea of formulating, being self-aware to formulate some kind of principles or idea of where we're going, which then enables us to really dive a bit deeper into that and be able to connect those dots differently. Now, a couple of final thoughts and ideas. One thing is really about, especially in teams and groups, starting to normalize imperfection. We always think we can plan everything out, but in a fast-changing world, we can't. And so one of the things that I find most exciting about the serendipity mindset is that it says, it's not about losing control if something unexpected happens that we turn into an innovation. Quite the opposite. It's actually a sign of gaining more control over uncertainty because you were able to cultivate an environment in which serendipity can happen. And so it's really about this idea that we can role model that it is not about imperfection to not be planning everything exactly out, but actually that we can set a sense of direction and then allow a little bit for emergence between this. Believe me, as a German, who wants to plan everything out, that was tough to first understand, but actually, that's the only way how life can actually work, given that so many things are developing unexpectedly. A lot of other things, of course, are around the question of, at the end of the day, nobody has figured it all out. I've had the fortune and the pleasure to work with very inspiring people around the world. And I can tell you, after the third glass of red wine, everyone will tell them that a lot of times they're just winging it. They're just kind of like trying to figure it out. Then they pretend they have it all under control. And then they go back home and they're like, oh my God, I have no idea what I'm doing. The point is that at the end of the day, we should allow all of us to have a little bit of that winging in us and to not feel that is something that means that we are not equipped to do something. Quite the opposite. A lot of times our resilience comes from realizing that a lot of times we have to learn new things, and we can learn a lot of new things that we don't have figured out yet. Now, long story short, being a German, I want to, I have a philosophical side, and I want to close on a thought that Viktor Frankl had, and he was inspired by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who was a wonderful poet and philosopher. And that really encapsulates the mindset, which is that Goethe used to say that if you take someone as they are, you make them worse. But if you take them as what they could be, you make them capable of becoming what they can be. And that is what serendipity is all about. Serendipity is all about saying there could be so many things, right? A potential drug dealer could be a teacher. A potential movement in someone's trousers that might be an accident could be a new medication. Like, there could be so much happening if we open our eyes to it, and if as leaders we allow others to actually grow into that and become those people who they can be. And so I think that is one of our biggest responsibilities as leaders, to really be able to develop those kind of platforms for that kind of mindset. With this, thank you so much for being here. My editor tells me to mention that the book is available everywhere on Amazon and so on. So I hope, some of you might be excited about it. I'm also very much looking forward to keeping in touch. In the spirit of serendipity, please feel free to reach out via Twitter, LinkedIn, and so on. I'll be delighted to have a conversation. And with this, I think we're opening up to Q&A and to your questions or ideas or things that came to mind.
Fantastic talk, Professor Busch. Thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge. I have let's see who raises their hand, and while we're waiting for the audience, they ask. I have two questions. First, how do you distinguish serendipity from synchronicity? This concept brought up by Carl Jung that you mentioned twice in your book. And the second, well, I'll leave you with that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I remember, in the context of Jung, so synchronicity really as this meaningful coincidence, right? So it's just a moment. So I remember he was sitting with a patient, right, and he was trying to talk with the patient about something, and the patient didn't really open their mind up to it. And then the patient dreamt of something. I think it was some kind of a fly, and exactly. And so they dreamt of this. And then, when they had their session, the fly popped up in the background, right? And so it was this meaningful coincidence, which, it could or could not have happened, right? But it was just this incident. It wasn't an event. And, because it is quite probable that those kind of events can happen, they do happen from time to time. But that's without, a lot of times, without our own actions. Versus serendipity is really this process of seeing something, but also doing something about it. So synchronicity is this singular event, and serendipity really is this process of seeing and connecting dots.
Okay, interesting. Another question that I have, for publishing this book, you publish it with a very important publisher, right? It's Penguin, no?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Were there any serendipity moments for you to reach out to Penguin?
Constantly. I think this whole journey of writing the book and everything before that was completely coincidental and serendipitous. And I mean, I remember, originally I wanted to write another book. Originally I wanted to write a book on meaning and purpose, and then serendipity was a small part of it. But the big idea was around how do we integrate profit and purpose and so on. And I remember I went on holidays with a friend's family, and I pitched them the idea, and I was like, hey, look, this is the big idea for the book. And they were sitting there and they said, well, that sounds interesting. Do you have other ideas as well? And I was like, all right. It seems like that idea is not flying. And what I realized in that moment is that everything I've been doing over the last decades has somehow either in my own life been about serendipity, or a lot of my research has kind of led towards it. And so I spent the whole night then going back into my research, back into my experiences, and seeing that serendipity would be the linchpin that could bring it all together. And so that's how the book evolved. And I think, again, it's one of these things where, it wasn't one singular moment, but it was a whole journey that then at some point makes sense when you connect the dots at hindsight. But it's very emergent and, had lucky streaks.
We have two interesting observations, actually three. Now people are starting to talk. Fantastic. So the first one, Dr. Busch, I don't know if you can read on the chat, but number 11277994 says, how hard was it to adapt behavior to really take advantage of this?
Sorry, would you mind repeating the question? The line briefly broke. Yeah.
So it says, really interesting. It's a different way of handling situations to create opportunities in the future. How hard was it to adapt behavior to really take advantage of this?
That's a fantastic question, because it's a lot of times, you know, it's a lot of times, I'm a big fan of nudging, so of small behavioral changes, because a lot of times, you know, we all kind of grow up in certain systems and in certain kind of boxes, right? And it's very hard to break out of those boxes, right? I mean, I grew up in Germany. I was literally trained out of creativity, right? I was trained out of kind of doing a lot of things that I'm naturally doing today. And I think one of the things that I found very useful is small nudges with people. So I remember, for example, a colleague of mine a couple of years ago, he came to me and he said, Christian, it all sounds wonderful what you're doing, but I don't need more serendipity in my life. I'm happy where I am. I don't need any of this and so on. And so we made a deal. We said, you know what? Do a couple of things differently. Ask a couple of questions differently. You know, say hello to the person in the queue, whatever. Just a couple of things that you do slightly differently. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll talk. Now, after a couple of weeks, he comes back and he's like, Christian, I didn't know life can be so joyful. I didn't know that actually, like, there could be something like this out there, because he hadn't seen anything different, right? And so the point here is that with small, like, nudges, with small changes, a lot can happen. So I think it's one thing to tell someone something about it, and the other thing is to have them experience it. And so that's why I'm such a big fan of, like, small exercises around building that serendipity muscle, because it's so much about essentially then experiencing how good it feels once you start doing it. And then what it does is, especially during periods like COVID, right? I mean, I had COVID in March, so I had severe breathing problems. It was like a really, really bad period. But like, in a way, that kind of mindset, you know, rereading Viktor Frankl, believing that it can turn around again, and so on, actually helped me through it. And so I'm a big fan of then uncertainty then becomes from a threat into an ally, because you try to see the best in that situation.
Perfect. I just have one thing to add on that question, because I like the word that says how hard it is, and this is a way that it shows up a system of values that you already believe that changing something is hard. So everything that you will do will be hard for you to change it. So it also shows up how we are limiting ourselves or programming ourselves in certain ways. So if you believe it's going to be hard to change certain behavior, guess what? It's going to be hard. But if you believe it's going to be easy, then it's going to facilitate things, because the mind is a very powerful element that we have. I recommend in this sense, if you Google Flow Mastery course, I took it some years ago with some friends, Justin Furman and Jackie Mitchell. It was very helpful for me. And then we have another question here. It says, I actually think it's so interesting how we find ways to adapt and create opportunities. In the middle of a pandemic, I think it's a challenge, because everything has been changing, and it's not easy to handle a situation at a global level or change something so quickly. That's a comment from a bright student here at ULACIT. Then another one that is interesting, I think you'll like it. It says, how does serendipity match with purpose? The Japanese concept of ikagi, I don't know if I said it correctly, has always been appealing to me. Should we seek what we're passionate about through people, or shall we let serendipity have a bigger role on the driver's seat of what we expect be our destiny?
That's a fantastic question, and by the way, also many thanks for the pandemic comments. I think that's very true, and I think for us it's a lot about trying to find new ways of how we can do virtually a lot of those kind of things that we traditionally did offline, and we can definitely also talk more about that. And also I think Herman, you had a great point around how, in a way, if we get away from a fixed mindset, which is about it's hard to change to a kind of more growth mindset, and I highly recommend also like Cara Thomas has done a lot of work around how do we get into a growth mindset. So this idea that we can change everything and everything is changeable, and then essentially we realize that a lot of things actually are easier to change than we think they might be. But more importantly, I think about Ikigai, this is fascinating, because I had a conversation a couple of days ago with someone who's extremely religious, and who essentially asked similarly, you know, what is the role of destiny and fate, and even like the role of God, and the role of, if you say there might be something met out in some way, what is it about me then what I can do in terms of if serendipity is all about my own behaviors, right? And we ended the conversation with the idea that at the end of the day, there might be some kind of bigger picture, but you still got to buy a ticket. You still need to do something. You still need to buy a lottery ticket, right, to be able to win in the lottery. And so the point here is that a lot of times, you know, when you think about something like purpose, so we just did a huge study with an interview series with some of the world's successful CEOs. We said, okay, what is it that makes you really successful? And one of the things that they all had in common is that they all knew a little bit approximately where they're going, right? So if you're MasterCard, for example, a big company, they say, we want to be part of financial inclusion. So we want to give people access to the financial system, especially in those contexts where they don't have access. But we don't know exactly how to exactly do it. And so you have this certain sense of where you're going, but then also you're very open to saying, oh, there might be a lot of unexpected strategies or moments emerging that could happen. So for the individual, a lot of times, what I've seen in my life and in the life of others, a lot of times we might, you know, at some point not have a very clear purpose or an exact way of where we're going. I think that comes a lot of times later in life, but we might have a key curiosity or a key interest or a key sense of what is important to us, a key value. And that can then really help us as a North Star to be able to connect dots. And so I'm a big fan of, and that's why I feel like the book Men's Search for Meaning is so important, because it helps us to discover our own meaning and really what is it that is really important to us. And then it makes it easier to connect dots. And then essentially you have a beautiful duality between you knowing approximately where you want to go, but also being open to all these beautiful distractions that can lead you to something even nicer. But I think it also comes back to the point of potentiality, that a lot of times we can't even imagine where we could go. And, you know, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, would I end up here with Herman and Professor Ramos and others, I probably wouldn't have expected that, right? And so it's really, to Herman's point, that a lot of times things happen serendipitously. But again, the more we can build a certain sense of direction, the more it helps then also to not have too many distractions, because people who have a lot of serendipity also get distracted sometimes, right? And so a sense of direction can be a nice filter also for that.
Fantastic. So do we have any more questions? Maria Jose or Mr. Alex or Carolina or any other students who wants to participate?
I think there is another comment in the chat. It's actually a comment, but perhaps Dr. Busch wants to share his thoughts. And it says, I like this way of looking at things, since it is looking for an opportunity in the middle of a bad situation. It is, as we say in Spanish, if life gives you lemons, you make a lemonade.
Well, that's a great point, right? I mean, I remember, so, you know, I graduated right into the financial crisis, like 2007 or 2008. And there was the time when we set up Sandbox, which, you know, now became a global community. And I remember, you know, we first wanted to organize a big conference, and, you know, we had all these big plans and we had all the sponsors lined up, and we were so excited. And then the financial crisis hit, and all the sponsors said, nah, you know, we can't fund this anymore. And so this was exactly like, you know, life gave us in a way that kind of the lemons, right? They squeezed us. But then essentially what happened was, because we had to rethink the model, we were like, oh, wow, maybe we can then start, instead of a big conference that costs a lot of money, maybe we can start with small local dinners a bit more. And maybe we can create local communities a bit more first, and then bring them all together later on after the crisis at the big conference. And so now when we look back, we would say, wow, actually, that was the best thing that could have happened to us, because it brought the community so closely together, because people got to know each other first before meeting all together. And so it's those kind of moments, I feel, where, to exactly your point, like like what we do with the lemons, like that's really the big question. And, you know, a lot of times when you talk with people about their most kind of beautiful serendipitous things that happen in their life, a lot of times it's really about a situation of bad luck, but then because they had persistence and tenacity, turned into good luck in the long run. And so I think that's a really important point. And it's also something, I think there was another question around how can we start a habit of a serendipity journal? And I think one of the things that that I find really interesting about this is that something that I found very useful is to really sit down and reflect on a couple of things, such as, like, what is important to me? Like, what are the kind of things in my life that, if someone would ask me, what do you do? That I can bring in as an answer where I don't just answer, I'm a student at ULACIT or so, but I'm answering, I'm a student and currently I'm exploring this, but what I really want to do then is this. And so what you can do then is you can start kind of like seeding or casting a couple of hooks because you're more aware of what could be. And then, serendipity will lead you anyway somewhere else, but it's a starting point. But also I would really do this idea of looking at what are the unexpected moments in your life and trying to understand how did you react and what was it that held you back, for example. Because I think a lot of times there are things deeply in our psyche, to Herman's point earlier, where we have limiting beliefs, right? So, for example, I talked with this gentleman who I asked him, so how much serendipity do you have in your life? And he said, before 25, never, and after 25, all the time. And I asked him, what was it? And he said, well, I went through this journey where, I grew up in a family that always said, people like us are not supposed to do X, Y, Z. People like us are only working in service. We are not businessmen. We're not this, we're not this. And so there was this limiting belief. And even if people would come to him, he used to work as a waiter, even if people would say, man, I want to introduce you to this person who can employ you, whatever, he would always say no, because in his mind, that was not for him. And so it's really about overcoming. And for him, it was overcoming the self-belief of who he was supposed to be. And so I feel like when we start writing down what holds us back from acting on some opportunities or what holds us back from acting on some of these moments, then actually we also see what might be deeper psychological questions we can work on for ourselves, and it usually leads into really interesting directions as well. But then more importantly, we can also think about what would I do next time differently. So next time I run into a person like this, next time I'm on a call with Mr. Fernandez or with Mr. Duarte or Professor Ramos, like what is the kind of thing I can feed in differently so that then maybe something can emerge. So really these kind of questions of how can I already now position myself for the unexpected.
Okay, and there is another very interesting question because it says, are there scenarios in which serendipity doesn't happen? Is there such a thing as I cannot make serendipity happen? Connections won't spark. If so, what could be going wrong? And here I would like to add that from this lecture and webinar so far, you mentioned that we have to recognize some structural differences, as you posted in the beginning of your conference, so that as in the platform towards building serendipity, then there might be differences to start with. But then something very interesting that Herman said, which has to do even with the way we phrase the question, which is the growth mindset. So I think different scenarios, and perhaps you can add something else.
Absolutely, and that's really fascinating, right? Because it's exactly those things, two things, Professor, that you hit the nail on the head. That in a way, it's really this idea that in every situation, like I can't imagine a single situation in the world. I mean, yes, there are always some kind of situations, but I can't imagine a lot of situations where even in the most boring of conversations, you can still connect dots, right? You can still, and a lot of times, when people say, oh, I was with this boring person, usually that's more an assessment of the person who says the other person was boring than about the other person, because they were not able to bring something interesting out of the person, right? Like, I mean, the most boring people I know, right? When I think about, I don't know, I don't want to name names, but like there are very boring people in the world, right? Objectively speaking. But even those people, like when you start talking about like which transitions they went through, or, maybe it's a father who stayed at home and X, Y, Z, but they all had their kind of emotional journeys. They all had different types of journeys. So there's always something interesting somewhere that could be a common denominator, and it's up to us to bring that out. And so the wonderful thing, I think, is to always assume, and that's the example around the framing around framing yourself as being lucky, is also about framing the world as in every situation, there could be something where we could connect the dots. And so one practice I always recommend is whenever someone is speaking, always thinking about how can I connect the dots to others? How can I connect the dots to someone I like, or to a professor, or to someone else? And because once I get myself into that mindset, then I start seeing dots where others don't see any dots. And so that's where it gets really interesting. But then to the second point also, really this importance of saying that at the end of the day, there are structural limitations that are there, and we have to work on them. And I think that is also a big job for the leaders that that you will be or already are, to really remove some of these things, such as, for example, it's not enough to just giving someone a scholarship who comes out of a less privileged background, because you know, they still, when they call back home or something, there's less kind of an ability to connect dots, because, you know, you need the kind of mentors around you, then you need the kind of people who others might have access to. So it's really about thinking holistically about how to develop these opportunity spaces versus just like, okay, hey, here's one thing we're doing for someone. And so long story short, I think it's also about systemically and holistically looking at questions of how can we lift up the base level of serendipity for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And speaking about mentors and scholarships and taking advantage of serendipity, if you haven't noticed, Herman gave us a wonderful and very nice news in the chat. He says, and I'll give Herman the chance to elaborate on this, but he says that for the first 5 participants, Simple Legal Consulting will sponsor you with electronic version books of Serendipity Mindset. So he's giving you the contact to get back to him on the books.
Wow. Copying you, yeah, of course. They ask great questions. It's like they want the book. What gives them the book? No problem.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's great. Yeah, no, fantastic.
Yes, no, and they want to make it happen, so this is a chance to make things happen.
Yeah. Copy the dean and copy not the dean. That is me, and you'll get your books. So we have more questions. Do you think that there is a way to track opportunities, or do you believe that in order to find them, we must always create them? Like attracting them or creating them?
Yeah, that's a great question, because, you know, when I think about attracting, I think a lot about energy as well, right? And that is something, you know, everything we just talked about is very science-based. And when it comes to energy, it's partly science and partly what we've just seen work. But, you know, we haven't figured it all out yet. So if we think about things such as, you know, in physics, we know that things have to be in motion, right? Or in quantum physics, we know that energy travels, right? And so it's kind of these different things. Imagine the situation, you know, you have to do your assignment and you sit next to someone who's yawning all the time, right? Like, versus you sit next to someone who has good energy, like, guess when you will be more productive. And the same is like with, you know, when am I more motivated to connect the dots for you? When you have good energy towards me, right? Or when you have like a good spirit and all these things. And so that is where it gets exciting, because a lot of times that's also where spirituality and science meet a lot. But it's that kind of interface where we know that, you know, whoever puts good things out there is more likely that good things come back, not because it's just spiritual, but actually because people have more incentive also to give like things back. And so it's really kind of where I'm a big fan of, that you attract a lot by also helping others to attract, right? And so that's actually one of the key things that I love about that kind of mindset, that it's not only about creating serendipity for ourselves, it's mostly about creating serendipity for others, and then it comes back, right? And then people create a lot of serendipity for us. So it's really that kind of beautiful circle of it. And so long story short, I think it's both where we can attract more of it by the way we are, by being authentic, by the energy we put out there, by the questions we ask and so on. But also then we can really, you know, do the other way around as well with a couple of the practices we talked about.
I have a question when you mentioned this. How do you connect the concept of flowing, this state of mind of flowing, now that you mentioned energy and resistance and creating serendipity and getting opportunities? Like, for example, until March 26th, I was living in London, and due to the pandemic and everything that happened, I simply decided to go back to Costa Rica. And because I felt there was too much resistance to be good enough college. And it was a bit too complicated. And I simply decided to go back, was in quarantine for 14 days. And on day 9, it hit me on the head, you know, like, boom, I have to change the name of my company. Put it simple, legal consulting. I don't want anything that is complicated. And it was because on LinkedIn, I saw someone that had a law firm that the name was Complex Legal Studio. And I was like, well, this is disgusting. I don't want anything complex in my life. I want things to be simple, relaxed, because this is what I want to track. You know, have a good job, take it easy, don't kill myself working, but make it meaningful. So this is like a way I connected with energy, flowing, no resistance, just letting it go and nurturing the serendipity atmosphere or context. How do you see it, that, Dr. Busch?
Yeah, 100%. And you know, it reminds me of something else, actually, of, you know, this eureka moment, right? Like, we always, like, you know, these moments where, like, you're on a Sunday in a shower and, like, you have this moment of, oh my God, like, I should change things and stuff like that. But that's usually because your brain was already working on some things, or it connects something that finally, you know, when you see the LinkedIn post, you see it coming together. But the point is, there was already quite a bit of information around that. So it's that kind of event, but also you probably had some things before that. And I think, I mean, Herman, I think you are actually a wonderful example of a serendipity in practice, right? Like you're constantly kind of cultivating that kind of serendipity, including now, right? And
all the time, all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So also, I mean, highly recommended to reach out to Herman, by the way, and learn from his intuitive ways.
The professor here is María José, that is such an expert in everything, you know, like she's a big fan of India and has so much knowledge. So I hope all the students in ULACIT take advantage of this world-class professor and dean that they have, so they can reach out to her and talk. And also with the CEO of ULACIT, you know, it's like top of the world, has been friends with Cristiano Ronaldo, with everyone. And that is something that just happens if you have high energy vibration, in my conception of the world, I think. So ULACIT is a fantastic university. If I was 20 again, I would be at ULACIT studying, without a doubt.
Yes, me too, absolutely. And well, Herman and I think are partners in Serendipity, and every single endeavor that we have met into or worked together with has always been the result of looking at potential and just opening doors, as we were mentioning the other day, opening doors for each other and for other people. And well, for all our students, we hope that we have also opened many doors and left many open questions for all. For today, you already have Dr. Busch's email, contact, Herman's as well, so that you can continue. Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Dr. Busch said he has to go soon. No, Dr. Busch, how much time we got from you? We have one last question, which I think one more. Curious
one
about
last question.
And serendipity. When uncertainty overwhelms us, especially in this time, is there any tip about how to give that big step of moving into without letting a lot of stress emerging in the process?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and I think, you know, I've certainly had that, you know, coming from Germany, where you're so used to planning things out and strategizing everything else. Ambiguity usually, like you know, is something that gives me anxiety, and I think it's really something where at the end of the day, like, this is why I'm such a big fan of smaller things, such as, like, I mean, I keep coming back to the Viktor Frankl book, because to me that has been very helpful. I mean, he survived the Holocaust, which is the toughest of situations you can imagine. And when you read through it and you see, for example, one thing he did was that every day he would still have a conversation with someone else in the concentration camp, because he knew that it would help the other person. And by doing that, he felt better about his own meaning and his own purpose. And so I feel it's these small things where, you know, if we get into action, because I think the worst thing we can do in moments of ambiguity is to think about what could be, right? In terms of, oh my God, like, bad things can happen, versus to, for example, go to the neighbor and, you know, when you know they're in a tough place, and help them get the groceries, or, you know, things which are just about saying, okay, I do something about this moment. And I've seen that in my own life, that's when I get least anxious, because A, I have something to do, but also B, there is something that puts things in motion so that actually good things can happen from it. So I would say, like, it's really these small kind of things, small changes. I also have found that meditation is a huge benefit in that moment, in terms of really kind of sitting down and grounding, because it allows us to get back into the big picture of essentially that, you know, every moment in a way feels intense sometimes, but then knowing that we went through that moment before, and knowing that the world usually plays out okay, that kind of gives us back that feeling that things will be okay. So I think I can highly recommend meditation also, and really kind of grounding in that regard.
Well, Thank you very much. It has been an honor for us to have you both here, both Dr. Busch and Dr. Duarte. You have shared not only knowledge, but mostly wisdom with all of us. Hopefully have left everyone with a lot of ideas about how to increase your potential, about how to grab opportunities, how to connect the dots. I am pretty sure that all of us who are here, the team from Ana Carolina to Dr. Alex, Herman, Dr. Busch, everyone, if we're working in education and we are in the academia, it's because we believe in building this potential and finding this potential in people, as Dr. Busch mentioned in the last quote of his presentation. So for all our students and participants, we believe in you and we want to connect the dots with you. Please be sure to reach out. Now you have all of our contacts and the speakers' contacts, so reach out to let us know your great ideas. And for the speakers, thank you so much, and I hope that we keep in touch and continue doing great work together.
Well, we have to do this event in person when it's possible, because I've never seen people saying thank you so much. Are you giving away points or something? Thank you? No, right? Yes, it's an authentic thank you that people are saying. No?
They're aiming for more sponsorships from Simple Legal Consulting.
So, and thank you so much. I mean, and thank you so much for this fantastic energy. I mean, also, Professor Maria, thank you so much for the extremely warm welcome, no, that you've given us, and Herman, thank you for connecting the dots, and Mr. Fernandez for being here. So it's yeah, I feel very grateful, and I'm really hoping, Herman, to your point, that we'll get to reconvene at some point in person very soon.
This event will happen in person, I tell you that.
Sounds super. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
¿Se desconectó?
No, aquí estoy.
Qué éxito. Yo nunca había visto